As usual, we've got 20 crazy videos lined up. Roll 'em!
Wham, bam, Teslacam. I hope you're satisfied.
Carlos was driving his Tesla Model Y in Edison, New Jersey, when another driver approached him quickly from behind. Carlos watched as the driver lost control. He hit the juice pedal and avoided being rear-ended, but the Lexus on his right wasn't able to escape the careening car. The speeding Toyota slammed into the Lexus, pushing it into a power pole and crushing it before it rolled into the parking lot of an auto glass shop. To top it off, the transformer on the power pole exploded, sending a shower of sparks down onto the road and an echo through the neighborhood. Carlos pulled into the first available parking lot as people poured out of the building to see what had happened. Incredibly, neither driver was hurt. Carlos was able to flag down a passing cop, and he immediately pulled over to help. Carlos pulled up his footage of the collision and invited the officer into his Tesla to watch it. The officer was grateful and told him the video evidence made it easy for him to determine that the Toyota driver was at fault. We've got 19 more action-packed Teslacam stories lined up, so hold on tight. Watch what happened when this submitter was driving his brand new Tesla Model 3 with fewer than 500 miles on it. Our submitter told us the impact seemed to come out of nowhere as the Lexus suddenly appeared without any time for him to avoid a collision or respond to any alerts. Police, firefighters, and paramedics all responded to the scene. There were no serious injuries, and everyone involved was able to walk away from the collision. Using our submitter's Teslacam footage, it was easy for the police to determine who was at fault. The Lexus driver had clearly run a red light, hit the Hyundai, then careened head-on into our submitter's Tesla. The insurance claim is still being processed, but based on the damage to our submitter's Model 3, it's safe to assume it will be deemed a total loss. Nathan was driving down the Monash Freeway in Australia. He was about to pass a semi-truck that started merging into his lane without signaling. Nathan thought the trucker was just having trouble staying in his lane, so he continued past it, but then the trucker merged behind him before rear-ending Nathan's Tesla. The semi hit Nathan's Tesla not once, not twice, but a total of 7 times. Nathan was completely boxed in by traffic, and with no escape route, the truck just kept running into him. At first, Nathan thought the trucker was road raging against him, but when he pulled over, the semi followed him to the shoulder. The trucker told Nathan he'd fallen asleep at the wheel before running into Nathan 7 times. Nathan made an insurance claim, and fixing his Tesla cost 14,000 Australian dollars, over 9,000 US dollars, and took 4 months. We'll let you decide if the trucker's story should be believed, but one thing is for sure, we definitely need more Tesla semis on the road. Tyson had parked his car in front of his workplace in Spokane, Washington, when he suddenly heard what sounded like a loud explosion. Tyson looked outside to find his Tesla crushed, shoved into a tree by a pickup truck. The pickup driver was uninsured, and he told Tyson he'd been trying to reach his phone on the passenger side when the collision occurred. Police were summoned to the scene, and the pickup driver was cited for distracted driving and driving without insurance. Thankfully, nobody was injured. After the repair estimate climbed to 35,000 US dollars, the repair shop stopped counting and totaled the car instead. After Tyson negotiated with his insurance provider, they paid him $44,000, a bit more than the $42,000 he'd bought his Tesla for in the first place. Nice! The side and rear angles reveal a lady had been sitting outside, and when the impact occurred, her dogs knocked her over and took off. But we're happy to report that both she and the dogs are fine, and she was able to get them back. This story has a funny twist. While Tyson was at his bank to finalize his insurance settlement, he mentioned our channel to the bank teller and told her he was sending us the Teslacam footage. The teller was also a fan of Wham Baam Teslacam, and she let Tyson know that the voiceover guy for the Wham Baam channels, that's me, Ben, lives in the Spokane area. What a small world! Another Spokane area local is our Tesla collision expert, Winston, who helped us find Tyson's car being auctioned off online. Nice detective work, Winston. Our next story is a perfect example of how not to overtake another vehicle. Fabian told us the impatient driver ahead of him had been trying to overtake a truck for several minutes, but when he spotted his chance, he somehow forgot to accelerate. Fabian tried to warn him with his horn and high beams, but the other driver didn't seem to care. To make things worse, the vehicle he almost hit was a school bus. This close call could have been a terrible tragedy. Abraham was grocery shopping in Aurora, Colorado, when someone keyed his Model 3 that was parked outside. The vandal left a nasty 8-inch scratch on the trunk lid, and now Abraham has to wait a month before he can take it in to get fixed. Abraham has no idea who this person is, which leads us to believe the Tesla itself was the target rather than Abraham. He hopes that sharing this video will help the criminal get identified and held responsible. If you recognize them, send us a message and we'll forward the information to the authorities. James was driving his Cybertruck in Fargo, North Dakota. He was stopped at a red light when a Honda pulled up behind him. Oh boy, are we about to see our very first Cybertruck Honda bump? Thankfully for the Honda, no. Instead, James noticed movement in his side view mirror, and when he turned around to see what was happening, he discovered that the Honda driver was out of his car. He was filming the Cybertruck while they both waited for the traffic light. James saved the Teslacam video, and after getting home and watching the latest episode of Wham Baam Teslacam, it struck him that this might be a good submission. You're right, James. Thanks. Jay was driving his Model Y down a highway in Sunrise, Florida, when he saw a Honda driver weaving in and out of traffic and cutting off other drivers. Amazingly, one of the drivers he cut off happened to be a police officer. The cop lit up his party lights and pulled over the Honda for some instant justice. Jay smiled and gave the officer a thumbs up before continuing on his way. Tom was leaving a shopping center when traffic on the road was backed up. Other drivers left a gap for him and even waved him through, so he drove through the gap to make a left turn. Suddenly, a minivan came out of nowhere, clipping the front of Tom's Tesla. They pulled over and called the police. Who do you think was found responsible? We'll let you think about it and circle back with the answer, but first, let's check out another wreck where threading the needle caused more than a small bump. Adam and his girlfriend were sitting at a red light when a car rapidly approached them from behind. Instead of stopping, the driver tried to thread the needle between Adam's Tesla and the pickup next to him. This attempt failed miserably as the car crashed into the back of Adam's Tesla, launching them forward into the intersection before the other driver tried to take off. Thankfully, his car had been immobilized by the impact, so he bailed on foot. Adam was able to flag down a police officer, and cops apprehended and arrested the driver after a short pursuit. Adam told us the guy had been under the influence, and he'd been clocked going 73 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone before the collision. Adam's Tesla had to be towed away. A few days later, he found out his battery had been punctured. With the repair estimate exceeding $65,000 US, his insurance provider decided to total it. Tenzin was charging his Model Y at a public charging station in New York City. Early in the morning, he received a notification that charging had been interrupted. When he reviewed his Sentry mode footage, he found out why. Evidently, Superman had decided to unplug his car as well as another that had been charging. Being such a strong superhero, he determined that the best way to remove the charging cables was to just rip them straight out of the cars. The charging station plug was damaged and no longer works, but the charging port of his Tesla still works fine. He called the charging station owner to report the incident, but they told him that crimes should be reported to the police. When Tenzin called the police, they told him they couldn't send anyone out to take a report due to a shift change and he'd need to come make a report in person. When he did, they told him they wouldn't take a report at all since his car wasn't damaged and that the charging station owner would need to do it. At that point, Tenzin just dropped the whole thing and continued with his day. Kelly was driving home in Phoenix, Arizona when police had partially blocked the road due to a collision up ahead. Drivers were understandably irritated with the holdup, and one impatient driver of a blue Toyota finally had enough. He decided to cut around traffic, even driving around a street sign that had been blocking off a construction zone. He even went into oncoming lanes to get around traffic, but that's when an SUV driver also grew impatient and decided to make a U-turn. Sadly, the SUV driver didn't see the Toyota and T-boned it while making the U-turn. Okay, pay close attention to the tan Chevy directly in front of Kelly and notice that the driver just had a front row seat to the collision. You'd think that after witnessing a collision like that, someone would pay extra close attention to avoid being involved in another one, right? Apparently not. Exactly 60 seconds later, as both Kelly and the Chevy driver approached the collision scene, police had blocked off the road and were directing traffic onto a side street. While the Chevy driver was waiting to turn, do you think they were paying attention to what was happening behind them? No, they sure weren't, because they didn't even notice a police car with lights and siren active. Just as the cop car was passing them, the Chevy driver decided to turn. Thankfully, the officer was paying attention, slamming on the brakes and swerving to avoid a collision. Another officer just shook his head in disbelief. We've seen a lot of crazy things on Wham Baam Teslacam, but evidently we haven't seen everything. As Tom approached a red light in Columbia, Maryland, a pedestrian was waiting to cross the street with his dog. When the signal said to walk, they both began crossing, but the dog was walking upright on his hind legs. Have you ever seen a dog walking around like this before? Well, now we all have. This submitter was taking his fiancée out for brunch when he engaged full self-driving for a very dangerous and stressful section of highway in downtown Chicago. Suddenly, a Honda CR-V driver slammed on the brakes and our submitter's Tesla engaged automatic emergency braking. With a Prius approaching rapidly from behind, he hit the juice pedal so his Tesla would continue forward. Sadly, traffic behind the Prius wasn't traveling at a safe speed or distance and crashed into the Prius in what would be a 3-car collision. It wasn't safe for our submitter to stop, so he kept going. A few seconds later, he noticed an oncoming cop car responding to the collision scene. Andrew was on his way home after some fun in town when he spotted a large truck approaching a stop sign. Andrew assumed the driver of the truck would stop at the stop sign, but he didn't. He just kept right on going. Andrew slammed on his brakes and managed to stop in time to avoid a collision. He then followed the truck to get the DOT number so he could let the company know what had happened. Mr. Egg was sitting at a red light when the pickup next to him suddenly began backing up and its lowered tailgate slid under the hood of the SUV behind it. Wow, now how did that happen? Was the pickup driver trying to stab the SUV's engine? That's the sort of thing you'd expect to see on Robot Wars. Ralph was driving on a main road when a van driver who should have yielded decided ain't nobody got time for that and crashed into the side of Ralph's Model Y. Ralph told us the Tesla swerved on its own before applying emergency braking. Once the repair estimate exceeded 50,000 euros, about 55,000 US dollars, the insurance provider deemed the Tesla a total loss. Brandon was driving home from a Mother's Day lunch when he started pulling out onto a busy feeder road. The driver behind him thought he'd fully pulled onto the road and was focused on oncoming traffic when bam! Okay, the impact thankfully wasn't that hard, otherwise Brandon's Tesla would have been pushed into traffic. This story is less about the collision and more about the expensive repair that followed. Thankfully, nobody was hurt and both drivers pulled into a parking lot to exchange information. Surprisingly, the truck still worked fine. Brandon's Tesla, on the other hand, spent 5 weeks in the shop and structural damage was discovered. The final repair bill came to over 12,000 US dollars, plus another $2,300 to replace the paint protection film. So much for being just a fender bender. No Wham Baam Teslacam episode is complete without a Honda bump, and our next submitter is this week's unfortunate victim. A Honda Ridgeline pickup truck with Texas license plate 1 Daddy drifted into our submitter's lane without signaling and smashed into the side of his Tesla Model 3. As our submitter was trying to tell the pickup driver to follow him off the highway, he sped off, making this a hit and run. The driver was a white male with long hair, possibly in his 40s, and he seems to think he's the best daddy around. Our submitter filed an insurance claim and made a police report, then continued driving his damaged Tesla for 2 months before his appointment at the Tesla Collision Center. Then one day, while driving on the highway, the Tesla shut down after a pinched cooling line caused the car to overheat. It ended up having to be towed away. Our submitter's insurance provider located the hit-and-run driver. Either they used the Teslacam footage, or they just looked up who is the #1 daddy. Sadly, the daddy was uninsured, so our submitter's uninsured motorist coverage paid for his repairs, minus his $500 deductible. After a year of trying to collect from the driver at fault, the insurance company decided it wasn't worth their time and closed the claim. While Lego Sailor was driving for a rideshare service, he and his passenger were shocked when they heard the roaring sound of jet engines right next to them. Lego Sailor realized that the US Navy Blue Angels were flying by in preparation for an upcoming air show. He smiled and said, "Go Navy!" Lego Sailor and his passenger enjoyed the rest of the ride, chatting about Lego Sailor's 6.5 years as a sailor in the US Navy. Okay, let's go back to Tom's collision with a minivan. When the police responded, they immediately determined that the party at fault was the minivan driver. They'd been illegally driving in the median, making them fully responsible for causing the wreck. Thankfully, Tom told us they had great insurance coverage. His Tesla was still in fairly good shape after the fender bender, and he was able to drive away. If you can't wait until next week for more Wham Bam, click here to watch this week's Wham Bam Security Cam episode.